The arena held 41 competitors that morning. 41 men in pressed GI jackets and polished shoes, every one of them carrying a resume of trophies, lineage, and names that rang through the martial arts world like struck bells. The lobby of the Crestfield Regional Championship smelled of floor wax and old ambition. At 7:52 in the morning, a man named Mason Hale walked in through the side door, not the main entrance, because he didn't know there was a difference. He was 31 years old. He wore a canvas jacket that had been washed so many times the color had gone somewhere between gray and forgotten. Beside him, holding his left hand with both of hers, was a 6-year-old girl named Cora. She was clutching a small stuffed rabbit she called Pepper. One of Pepper's ears was stitched back on with blue thread. Mason hadn't asked her to bring it. She always brought it. They stood in the lobby for a moment. Cora looked up at the banners. Mason looked at the check-in table. The man at the table looked at Mason, then at Cora, then at Pepper, and wrote something down that was probably not a compliment. What that judge didn't know, what none of them knew yet, would take 40 minutes and one impossible silence to understand. Stay with this one. It earns it. The elimination round began at 9 a.m. sharp. Head judge Raymond Crow sat at the center table, flanked by 2 associate judges and a tournament coordinator named Brianna, who had been doing this job for 11 years and had learned to read a room by the time the first competitor bowed in. Raymond Crow was 53. He had judged this regional circuit for 9 consecutive years. He wore a blazer the color of authority and spoke in the flat, clipped tones of a man who had decided things were a certain way and saw no reason to revisit that position. He had a record. He had standards. He had, in the past 2 years, disqualified 4 competitors for what he called insufficient demonstration of intent. 2 of those 4 had gone on to win national titles under different circuits. Raymond Crow did not discuss this. Mason Hale was assigned bracket 7. He checked in quietly, collected his number card, and found 2 chairs near the back wall. He sat in one. Cora sat in the other. She put Pepper on her lap and watched the warm-up area with the serious attention of someone twice her age. A man near them, barrel-chested, black belt, 3 regional medals on a lanyard around his neck, looked at Mason, then at Cora, then leaned toward the man beside him and said something that made both of them laugh. Mason heard it. He did not look over. He did not respond. He tied the lace on his left shoe that had come loose. His name was called at 9:41 a.m. He stood. He handed Cora a granola bar from his jacket pocket. He told her he'd be back in a few minutes. She nodded. She held Pepper tighter. He walked to the mat. Raymond Crow did not look up from his clipboard when Mason stepped onto the floor. The opening form, a requirement of the traditional division, was a sequence Mason had been performing since he was 19 years old. He had refined it in 3 countries. He had used parts of it to train 11 national champions and 2 Olympians. He did not think about that while he performed it. He thought about nothing. His body moved the way a river moves, not because it decides to, but because that's what it does. He finished. The room was quiet, not the quiet of appreciation, the quiet of people who hadn't expected to be unsure about something. Raymond Crow looked up. He studied his sheet. He wrote something. He set his pen down. He said, without inflection, that the execution lacked competitive sharpness and that the competitor's performance showed insufficient dynamic range for advanced bracket placement. He eliminated Mason Hale from the competition at 9:43 in the morning. The whole thing had taken less than 4 minutes. The man with the 3 medals on his lanyard slow clapped once, sarcastically, from across the room. 2 people near him smiled. Mason walked back. He sat down. Cora looked at him. She looked at the judge's table. She looked back at him. She didn't ask what happened. She held out half the granola bar. He took it. He ate it. He sat there for a while, without moving. What Raymond Crow did not know, and what the man with the medals did not know, and what the tournament coordinator Brianna almost didn't know until she thought about it later that night in her car in the parking garage, was who Mason Hale actually was. 3 years earlier, Mason had been running a private training facility in a converted warehouse on the eastern edge of Delville. Not a gym. A facility. The kind of place serious people went when they were serious enough to know the difference. He had built the curriculum himself over 11 years. He had trained 43 competitors under that roof. 11 of them had gone on to win at the national level. 2 had competed at international tournaments. One of them, a young woman named Priya Nair, whom Mason had trained from 14 to 22, had won a world championship in 2019 and credited, in 3 separate interviews, a coach she called the most important technical mind she had ever encountered. She had never said his name publicly. He had asked her not to. He had closed the facility 18 months ago, not by choice. His wife Elaine had died in February of the year before that, quickly and without warning. The kind of death that doesn't give you time to adjust because there is no adjustment. There is just the morning after, and the morning after that, and at some point a 6-year-old needs breakfast and clean socks and someone to read to her at night, and you are the only person left. He had closed the facility. He had taken a job maintaining the grounds at a public park 3 mornings a week. He had done what was necessary. He had not stopped training. He had trained in the parking space behind his apartment at 5:15 a.m. after Cora was awake but before she needed to be anywhere, and she would sometimes sit on an upturned bucket wrapped in a blanket and watch him, holding Pepper against her chest, completely still, the way she used to watch her mother paint. He had entered the Crestfield Regional because Cora had asked him to, not in a way that was cute or quotable. She had simply said, one evening while he was tying her shoes before dinner, that she wanted to see him do the thing he did in the parking lot in front of other people. She had said it the way she said most things, plainly, without performance, like a fact being stated for the first time. So he had entered. He had paid the $38 registration fee. He had ironed his GI. He had brought the granola bar, and Raymond Crow had eliminated him in less than 4 minutes. At 10:17 in the morning, something happened that had nothing to do with Mason Hale, except that it had everything to do with Mason Hale. A competitor in Bracket 3, a young man named Derek Saul, 22 years old, nationally ranked, trained under a well-known name in the circuit, injured his ankle during the semifinal round. Not badly, but enough. His coach, a heavy-set man in his 60s named Franklin who had been standing against the side wall all morning, moved to the edge of the mat immediately. He called a timeout. The tournament medic came. Everyone stopped. Mason watched from his chair. He watched the way Derek was holding his foot. He watched the way the ankle turned when Derek tried to shift his weight. He had seen this before. Not this exact injury, but this type. He had seen what a wrong call in the next 10 minutes could do to a career. He had also seen what a right call could do. He stood up. He told Cora to stay put. She looked at him. She looked at Pepper. She said, "Okay." He walked to the edge of the mat. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask permission. He crouched beside Derek and said 3 sentences in a low voice. Derek's coach looked at him. The medic looked at him. Franklin said something that was halfway between a question and a territorial statement. Mason answered it in the same low voice. He showed the medic something with his hands, a particular angle, a particular position. He said 2 more sentences. He stood up. He walked back to his chair. He picked up the second half of his granola bar and finished it. The medic looked at Franklin. Franklin looked at the medic. They did what Mason had described. Derek Saul, wrapped and stabilized in the way Mason had indicated, competed in the final round 40 minutes later. He won. He did not know the name of the man who had told the medic how to wrap his ankle. Brianna had seen all of it. She had been standing 6 feet away with a clipboard. She had written nothing down. But she remembered everything, the way people remember things they don't yet have the language to explain. It was 11:30 a.m. The Advanced Division Finals were beginning. Raymond Crow was at the center table. The finalist bracket was displayed on the board near the entrance. 3 competitors, 3 resumes. The room had filled back up. Coaches, parents, a few scouts from affiliated programs, a woman in the back row in a blazer who had driven 2 hours and had not yet introduced herself to anyone. The woman's name was Eleanor Marsh. She ran a national development program. She had come to Crestfield specifically to observe the coaching roster. She had a list of 11 names. None of them were Mason Hale's name. Mason was packing his bag. Cora was standing beside him, Pepper tucked under her arm, watching the board. She pointed at it. She asked what the names meant. Mason explained that those were the people who were still in the competition. She looked at the board for a long time. She said, "You should be up there." Mason said he wasn't, and zipped the outer pocket of his bag. From across the room, Franklin walked over. He stood in front of Mason with his hands in his jacket pockets, the posture of a man who is about to say something he means. He looked at Cora for a moment. He looked at Pepper. He looked at Mason. He said, "I know who you are." He said it quietly, not as a revelation to the room, as a fact between two people. He said he had been at the 2017 National Training Camp where Mason had consulted on curriculum design. He said he had watched Mason work with 6 different athletes in a single afternoon, and he had stood in the doorway of that gym and thought it was the best teaching he had ever seen in 20 years on this circuit. He said he had asked around and no one knew Mason's name. He said he had been asking around ever since. He said he hadn't expected to find him here, eliminated in round 1, eating a granola bar. Mason said nothing for a moment. He looked at Cora. He said, "She wanted to see." Franklin sat down in the chair beside Cora. He looked at the board. He said Mason's technical form had been flawless. He said what Raymond Crow had called insufficient dynamic range was, in his opinion, the most controlled and deliberate execution he had seen in a regional competition in years. He said it wasn't that Mason lacked sharpness. It was that Raymond Crow had mistaken stillness for absence. Cora looked at Franklin. She said, "My dad is still." Franklin looked at her. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, he is." At 12:04 p.m., Eleanor Marsh walked over. She had crossed the room without hurry. She had a leather notebook under her arm and the specific composure of someone who has learned to observe before she speaks. She looked at Mason. She looked at Franklin. She said she had been watching since 9:30 that morning. She said she had seen the ankle assessment. She said she had also seen the form. She said she had pulled the tournament registration database on her phone and found Mason's name and found nothing attached to it, and that was, in her experience, either because a person had done nothing or because a person had done everything quietly. She said she had a hunch it was the latter. She opened her notebook. She placed it on the empty chair beside her, flat, open to a particular page. The page had a list of 11 names with notes beside each. At the bottom, in ink that was visibly newer than the rest, was Mason Hale's name. She had written it there while he had been packing his bag. Raymond Crow had finished the finals and was now at the side table filling out the results paperwork. Brianna was beside him. She had the competitor files. She had been quiet since 10:17 in the morning. Now she said something to Raymond. He looked up. He said something back. Brianna opened a folder and placed it on the table in front of him. Inside the folder was a single printed document, a curriculum design credit from a 2019 National Federation publication. The credited designer was listed as M. Hale, Delville. The publication had been submitted as background documentation for the event and had been in the tournament's official records all morning. Raymond Crow looked at it for a long time. He said nothing. Brianna said, "He was eliminated at 9:43. Raymond said nothing for another moment. Then he stood. He walked across the room toward the chairs where Mason sat with Cora and Franklin and Eleanor Marsh. He walked with the particular gait of a man who is doing something difficult and has decided not to show that it is difficult. He stopped in front of Mason. He said his name once. Mason looked up. Cora looked at Raymond. She pulled Pepper a little closer. Raymond looked at the child for a moment, at the stuffed rabbit, at the blue thread ear. And then he looked at Mason, and he said, in a voice that did not waver but was quieter than his competition voice, "I made an incorrect assessment this morning." He did not say, "I'm sorry if you felt." He did not say, "In my defense." He said, "I assessed performance against expectation of style, and I was wrong to do that. Your execution was technically correct. My elimination decision was in error." The room had not gone entirely silent, but the people nearest, Franklin, Eleanor, Brianna, 2 coaches who had drifted over, were very still. Not the still of shock, the still of people watching something true happen. Mason looked at Raymond for a moment. He said, "Okay." He did not say thank you. He did not say it's fine. He said, "Okay, The way you say, okay, when someone has told you the weather report and you were already aware of the weather. Raymond looked at Cora. He lowered himself slowly, one knee, deliberate, the posture of a man unaccustomed to being at a child's height. He looked at her directly. He said, "Your dad is very good." Cora looked at him. She looked at Pepper. She looked back at Raymond. She said, with the complete seriousness of someone who has thought about this for a long time, "I know. That's why I wanted people to see." The room was quiet. Not the quiet of nothing happening. The quiet of a room where everyone has stopped pretending they weren't listening. Eleanor Marsh said nothing. She wrote something in her notebook. Franklin looked at the floor. Brianna looked at the competitor files she was still holding and then set them gently on a nearby chair. Raymond Crowe stood back up. He straightened his blazer. He said there were official forms he could file to note the assessment correction in the record. Mason said that would be up to him. Raymond nodded once. He walked back to the table. Eleanor looked at Mason. She said the development program had 2 open coaching consultation slots for the regional training cycle beginning in September. She said the work was part-time. She said it could be structured around personal commitments. She placed her business card on the chair beside him. She said she did not need an answer that day. Mason looked at the card. He looked at Cora. Cora was looking at the tournament board. She had found his name in the eliminated column. It was printed in small type, black ink, bracket 7, and she was looking at it with an expression that was hard to describe. Not sad, not angry. Something older than that. She reached into the side pocket of his bag without asking. She pulled out a pen. She uncapped it. She held it out to him. He took it. He looked at her. She looked at the board. He looked at the board. He put the cap back on the pen. He placed it in his jacket pocket. He picked up his bag. He said, "You ready?" She nodded. She tucked Pepper under her arm, the rabbit's one repaired ear pointing up, the blue thread bright under the gymnasium lights. She reached up and took his hand. They walked toward the side door, the one he had come in through that morning, because he still didn't know there was a difference. Franklin watched them go. Eleanor Marsh wrote one more line in her notebook and closed it. Brianna stood at the table and did not move for a long moment. Outside, the afternoon had turned cool and clear, the sky the particular shade of blue that happens only in the hour before the light changes. Mason held the door open. Cora walked through first, Pepper dangling by one paw. He followed. The door closed behind them. They walked down the side street toward the parking lot. She was still holding his hand. He was looking straight ahead. The granola bar wrappers were still in his jacket pocket. His bag was over one shoulder. His shoes on the pavement made the only sound either of them made for the first block. Then she said, still looking forward, in the voice she used for things that were simply true, "Can we have soup for dinner?" He said yes. They kept walking.